and welcome. And as you can probably already see, my cat is here. Hi, Dax. She's not gonna walk in front of you, so I can't do the proper wiggle, but I did a little wiggle. Oh, Betty. Can you see her tail? I'll try to do a little. Oh. She's like, no, not my tail. Okay. So for today's video, we're going to be talking about transports for pets. And I did debate doing this video just because it's a mixed bag. And I feel like people are going to have very strong opinions on it. But, you know, for the people who are curious or nervous or what have you, I figured, okay, I'll do a video on it. We'll discuss it. We'll discuss my experience with it and all that stuff. So this is a couple of caveats, as usual. One, this is specifically for rats. I do not have any experience transporting any other animals. I don't have any other animals. I just have rats. And cats, but small animal-wise, I just have rats. And for the other caveat, I'm going to specifically be talking about the United States I guess North America, but mostly the United States, because obviously I don't have experience in any other countries, but also because it just works differently in other countries. The United States in particular is designed specifically for cars and transportation like that. There's very few walkable areas in the United States. There's not very good public transportation in a lot of the United States, especially if you live in a suburb. That's usually just a city thing, and if you don't live near a city, you're kind of boned. And even in cities, sometimes they don't really have much. So, talking specifically about the United States, in the UK, they do something called, I think they call it like a rat train or something, and it's basically where if one person needs to get a rat from far away, or what in the UK would be considered far away, one person will pick it up, take the rats to like a rat show or to someone else, and that person will then take it on the next leg of their journey and so on until they get to their owner. And people in the UK are very happy to do this. In fact, a lot of people I see doing it are very proud to be doing that. That's not really a thing in the US. And a lot of that is because, like, for example, I live in Texas, which is the second biggest state in the US. And, like, to get from one major city in Texas to another, so for example, I live in San Antonio. Austin is, like, right here. That's an hour and a half away. Dallas is up here in comparison to where we are, and that's 3 hours away. And then, or 3 or 4, depending on traffic and, like, if you obey the speed limits. And then Houston's over here. That's also 3 hours away. And those are the major cities in Texas. So, like, transporting rats in the United States is a little bit more complicated. And you're not likely to have you're not likely to have more than 1 or 2 breeders near where you live, unfortunately. So, with all that in mind, let's talk transport. There are several pet-safe transports that operate within the United States. Some are bigger, some are smaller, some have stricter rules, some have shorter routes, some have longer routes, what have you. Some go into Canada, which is awesome. It can really help people who have, like, a specific kind of pet that's hard to come by. Rats are not particularly hard to come by unless you're trying to go through a reputable breeder. If you don't want to go through a reputable breeder, you can always rehome. There's going to be rescues. There's going to be accidental litters near you if pet stores have rats. There are options beyond just breeders for rats, but that is not the case for all animals, obviously. But again, we are mostly just talking about rats. So let's talk pros and cons. So let's start with the pros. Hold on, there's cat hair in my lipstick and my chapstick as usual. Okay. I don't wear lipstick. I don't know how I made that mistake. Anyway. Let's talk the pros first, because it's always best to start off with a positive. One, you can have access to reputable breeders that you may not otherwise have access to. So the thing in the United States, I've talked about it many, many times, is finding a breeder that matches your morals can be very difficult if you do not support culling. Culling is the practice of where a breeder will unalive an entire litter if they don't have desirable traits or specific rats, and these traits can include the wrong coloring, having too many babies, squirminess, squeakiness, things that can be worked through with rats. They choose to just cull them instead of working with them because honestly it's a cop-out and it's easier. And that is not a desirable trait in my opinion, and the more I hear people talk about culling, the more angry I get about it, which is fun for me. So if you want to find a breeder near you that has like all the earmarks of what you want a breeder to have, that can be very difficult. Some states have more breeders than others. South Carolina, for some reason, has a ton. Texas does not actually have very many, and Texas is so large that even though comparatively it has more than, say, like Arizona did, they're so far away that it's like, they're so far away that it does make it basically impossible to go and get those rats. So Dax is on one. You got the zoomies, baby? You got the zoomies? So if you want rats and you want to go through a breeder, that it can be very helpful. If you want specific rats, it can be very helpful. So if you specifically want like dwarf rats, or if you specifically want a variety of rat and that's not available near you, the transport can help with that. It is also a good tool for breeders themselves because it allows them to have a wider variety of options for getting new generations into their rattery. And it also allows them to possibly work with ratteries that they really admire that they would have otherwise been unable to work with. Now, this is why I personally use transport, because I wanted dwarf rats. I had Junimo and Joja, but their breeder wasn't someone I necessarily was confident in working with again based on the 5 rats from her that I did have. I do like her rats a lot. I just am not 100% sure on her. You know what I mean? So I decided to try the transport and get dwarf rats. Sorry, Penny just stuck her head out from under my bed. It just really looked funny. So I decided to try the transport to get dwarf rats, and that's how I got Polly, Glitch, and Mystic, and Agatha Summer Bonnet, and Scylla and Lois. The majority of my dwarf rats came from transport. Only Junimo and Joja came from within the state of Texas. It is also where I got the quad from because I wanted to try out a breeder and see how their rats were. So I decided to get the quad from them. And those are some of the positives from working with the transport. But with every positive, there's going to be some negatives. So let's get into the cons, and then I'll kind of talk about my personal experience with the transports. So yeah, let's get into it. So hi, Vivi. So the cons are whether or not they come into your area. So like a lot of transports have a very small route that they take, and you may not be able to find a rattery within that route that will allow you to use a transport. A lot of them are getting more comfortable with pet safe transports just because it's becoming more normalized, but not every rattery is going to feel comfortable with that. Some ratteries do it themselves where they plan out a route and it's like, if you're on this route and you want babies, hit me up, which is awesome because then you know that those rats are going to get very individualized care and attention on them. And I do appreciate that. So if you're in a tough spot, you might not be able to find a transport that actually works with you. But there's also the possibility that if they have a larger route, your rats are going to be on board for a very long time. And the thing with rats is they tend to travel well. However, there is a limit to that. There's a limit to how long they can be kept in a small cage in a back of a car with AC and heat blowing on them constantly. Hi. And those limits are very rat dependent. Another con is sometimes you're going to run into a situation where there's a rat that really isn't going to handle travel well, but they are traveling, and then by the time you get them, they're just not like emotionally okay, I guess is the best way of saying it. I'll get into that in a little bit, but like, yeah, that can happen. Obviously, illnesses can happen because here's the thing. There's going to be a lot of animals on that trip, and a lot of times the transporters are not going to require testing or anything like that to prove that the animal is actually healthy. So they can get all kinds of viral diseases. They can get mites, fleas, ticks, all kinds of parasites. Depending on what else is on the transport, some people transport ferrets as well as rodents, which means they're going to be in a small confined space with a predator, having to smell that constantly. The stress can weaken their immune system, and it can cause respiratory issues. Depending on what kind of bedding they keep the carrier in and how clean they keep their transport carrier, they can get respiratory issues, pneumonia. The stress again can cause them to get mites. So disease is a very, very concerning thing when it comes to transport. And a lot of transports do not require testing because that limits their clientele. Another issue is just the individualized care. The person in charge of the transport, unless they are willing to the person driving them, unless they are willing to do daily health checks, your rat is not going to get individualized care. They may not even really get much notice. They'll probably get taken out of whatever carrier they're in, put in a clean one, and that's it. And if that is the limit of the care, it is very easy for the rat's health issues to go unnoticed if some were to arise. And that can be very problematic, especially if the person who's doing the transport isn't very familiar with rats and doesn't know the signs to look for, which is an issue that can happen. Another issue is the same kind of concerns that happen during any road trip, which is weather conditions, the car having trouble, traffic, detours, that kind of thing, accidents. All of that can happen, including your transporter getting sick because they're going to all sorts of places. They're interacting with all sorts of items and gas stations and stuff. And it's going to be very easy for them to get sick because they are just exposing themselves to all sorts of things. And if they're sick, then there's a chance that the animal care might dip. So, all of those are some cons that can happen with transport. And at the end of the day, you're just going to have to decide how you feel about the likelihood of your rat getting sick because of transport and what you think of that. Today, you're just going to have to decide what chances you're willing to take. Are you willing to risk your rat getting sick? Are you willing to risk having to immediately take him to the vet or do mite treatment? You'll definitely have to quarantine. If you do not have a space to quarantine your rats off transport, then I would highly recommend not doing transport because, again, the rat's health, all the animal's health within the transport is completely dependent upon the breeder telling the truth. And I personally never take a breeder's word for it because I've been screwed over too many times, or they don't notice things that I notice, or what have you. At the end of the day, you have to assume the breeder's going to be looking out for their best interests instead of yours. And not to say be rude to the breeder or outright call them a liar, just don't necessarily take them at their word for it. Make sure that you are paying attention to your pets when you get them. What are you doing, baby? She was not from a transport. I got her in Texas. Now, let's talk about my individual experience with transport. So let's start with Polly, Glitch, and Mystic. Polly's no longer with me. She passed away from probably heart failure, but not 100% sure. Basically, her heart was extremely enlarged and pushing her rib cage out, so it was either heart failure or a tumor. But I still have Mystic and Glitch, and their transport was the easiest I've ever done. It really set me up for thinking that this was a viable option for me. And yeah, they came to me, they didn't have any health issues, except Glitch was a little skinny. And that does bring me to what I had said earlier about some rats really shouldn't travel like this. And I do believe Glitch is one that should not have been put on transport. And I do think her breeder miscalculated in how well she would handle it. And she's a sweet little baby now. Like, she gives me kisses, she wants to be in my shirt, she wants to cuddle. But she was extremely thin when I got her, and it took a long time. It took weeks, if not a couple of months, for her stress level to settle in enough that she started gaining weight and growing again. So she was like 5 months old when I got her, and she was puny for a long time. She's a much better weight and like body condition now than when I first got her, and I do just think that she probably should not have been put on transport. I forgot to mention Summer, Bonnie, and Agatha when I got them. Now, Summer and Bonnet are both no longer with me. They both passed away due to heart issues earlier this year, but I still have Aggie, and she's doing fine. Their transport was also fairly easy. Unfortunately, there was a couple of issues, namely being the smell of the carrier. So they were sent by a carrier that their breeder put them in. And I just do not feel like it was cleaned quite properly, because when I went to clean it out the day after I got them, you could smell it from like a good distance away. And they had just been in there for who knows how long without it being cleaned. And it might have only been a day or so, but if it smelled like that, then the carrier was too small, and the transporter probably should have noticed this and made some adjustments, but they didn't, which is unfortunate. But for the most part, it wasn't that bad of a transport. Now, the next set I got were the quad. Also fine. They had the New Home sniffles. They were a little sneezy when I got them, but they did clear up, and they were mostly fine. The next transport was Scylla, Lois, and Aura. And you might be thinking, you didn't mention Aura earlier, and that's because Aura died 5 hours after I got her. So with Aura, she had severe respiratory issues when I got her. I believe she had pneumonia, and she was a dwarf rat. She was 50 grams when I got her. And I do not think the person who did the transport noticed, because when I went to pick her up, she pulled them out of their little, they were in a travel carrier of some kind. I think it was like a lab bin. She pulled them out, she opened the lab bin, and I looked in, and the second my eyes landed on Aura, I was like, that rat's not okay. And the transport actually thought she was dead when she went to pick her up, and she didn't move. She thought she was dead. And I did everything I could for Aura, but she did pass away 5 hours after I got her. And as if that wasn't enough of an issue, Lois's eyes were basically glued shut for the first week that I had her. It's like I would put eye drops in and I'd smooth them open and I'd clean them, and her eyes would open, and then I'd go check on her again and they were closed again. They were like sealed shut because she was having respiratory issues. And Scylla has the same problem. They both have lung scarring, as in from the moment I got them to now, they had consistently made noise and no antibiotic touches it, which is an indication of lung scarring. So they both got lung scarring from that. So, I personally will not do transport again because it's just not safe, in my opinion, anymore. Another thing I have noticed is the rats that I get within my own state tend to have a lot fewer respiratory issues. So like the quad, they don't really have too many respiratory issues, but they do get the snuffles every now and then. Nothing that deserves antibiotics. But in comparison to the rats that I got within the state of Texas, the rats I got within Texas don't make noise. They just don't. The ones I got outside of Texas do. So something about the transport, probably the changing climates, I don't know. It just like messes with them in a weird way. And they're just a lot healthier if I don't go out of state to get them. Another thing that I've always like been concerned about personally is breeders. A reputable breeder will always say, if you're rehoming your rat, you need to rehome them to me first. You need to contact me first before you send them anywhere else. I do not see how that can happen with a transport. If your breeder is several states away, are you supposed to hope that the transport goes the right direction so you can put the rat back on transport back to the breeder? Because I'm going to level with you, 90% of people are not going to do that. They simply won't. They'll just rehome the rat and not even say anything to the breeder. And that has always been a concern of mine, because a lot of these rats that end up on transport are desirable varieties or rare varieties or what have you. So a nefarious person could very easily just get these rats and do whatever they want with them, because it's going to be a lot harder to get them back to the breeder. So if a person rehomes like a werewolf rat to someone who sees dollar signs when they look at that rat, there's nothing the breeder could do. So yeah, those are just some of the pros and cons to transport. There's obviously more that I could talk about, like the chances of you ending up with like a pregnant rat, or what happens if there's an escapee, or what happens if for some reason they can't get the animal to you, what happens to that rat. All those are also things that could happen. But those are just some of the pros and cons, some things to think about before deciding to do transport. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, you know what to do. Like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye!